Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson, and I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I'm also an ordained minister, musician, and kirtan artist. And today I wanted to talk about whether or not happiness is sustainable. Before I get into that, though, I do want to thank all of my patrons on Patreon. They are the ones that make it possible for me to provide these talks without any kind of paywall, which is how I like to teach spirituality. So if you're interested in joining that community, please check out the links below. You can also tip me one time via PayPal or Venmo, and you can help out the channel by liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. All right, so today I wanted to talk about happiness and whether it's sustainable or not. This is something I've talked about in the past, but I wanted to touch on this again. So I think the first thing we need to look at is, what is happiness? What do we mean when we say happiness? I think for some people, when they think of happiness, they think of a kind of an excitement, kind of a yay, like really excited, exuberant kind of feeling. Others, I think about pleasure. And the way I'm defining it might be a little bit different, but we'll get into that in a bit. So in the ancient traditions from which yoga and Buddhism and many of the things I teach come from, there's a word preya, and this is transient pleasure. And this points to what I was saying earlier. For many people, they think of happiness as kind of a sustained pleasure, or getting what we want, or pleasing ourselves. Now, what's interesting about this is this faces what's called the hedonic adaptation, basically, which is our nervous system is not really designed to experience like really pleasurable states for prolonged periods of time. It just simply adapts to those. It tones down those sensations. So what once brought a lot of pleasure, if it's sustained, eventually it will stop bringing pleasure, and so we will need more of it. And this is the phenomenon that we see present in a lot of people who are addicted to substances. Is they use a substance, it brings them a lot of pleasure, and so they keep using it, and as they keep using it, the pleasure goes down. As a result, they need more of the substance in order to sustain the pleasure or to recreate the pleasure. So, at least from a physiological standpoint, from what we can see, pleasure, sustained pleasure, isn't really possible. Pleasure is going to be something that comes and goes. And again, if we figure out a way to get around that using, say, drugs or something like that, we find that the body just adapts as a result. Okay. So when we look at these wisdom traditions, there's a term called samsara. And what samsara is usually depicted as, it's like a wheel. And so we are either at the top, which is like pleasure and we're winning, or we're on our way down, right? Or we're at the bottom, which is we're as low as we can go, or then we're on our way back up again. Now, this is what is taught is the average person's experience. They are identified with the wrong things, and so they ride this sort of roller coaster up and down and up and down. And this is said to lead to suffering. What the yogi wants to do is to move from the outside to the center. So at the center of the wheel is a point that doesn't really move. And that point is sustainable. Every other point on the outside of the wheel, it's always moving. It's either going up or down or up again. Okay, so it's not, you can't stay on that. The wheel is going to constantly turn. You could say that life is just going to life. That sustaining circumstances that you like is not possible. And as we've already explored, even if it were, what you will likely find is the pleasure that you got from those circumstances will go away over time. It will be lessened, it will disappear just because of hedonic adaptation, okay? So this kind of pleasure-seeking happiness is not sustainable. So the Sanskrit language has another term that these traditions use, which is sukha. Now, this is sometimes translated as happiness or pleasure or ease, joy, bliss. But even though we're using some of the same words like pleasure, this pleasure, you could say, is derived from a different place, or this enjoyment is. So sukha is considered more sustainable. It is a sort of sweetness. And I'll share with you my experience of it. Before finding these teachings, I, like most people, experienced pleasurable states, pleasurable experiences. I also experienced unpleasant states and experiences. But I'll say that on balance, I would say I was suffering. So even though maybe I experienced an equal number of pleasant and unpleasant experiences, I felt like something was lacking. I felt like I was on a roller coaster of sorts, and it led to a lot of suffering. When I discovered meditation and started meditating, something fundamentally shifted in my experience. Over time, it didn't happen immediately, but it sort of raised up my baseline. So, you know, I would experience before kind of feeling low. And then I'd have like these moments of like, yay, I'm winning. And then I would come back to feeling very low. Now I could say, after practicing and integrating these teachings and these practices in my life, I basically am experiencing what I would consider a sustained level of happiness, well-being, and occasionally I have like what I might call a dark night of the soul, or I might suffer a little bit, but it's more rare. So most of the time I'm experiencing this sort of sustained wellness. And this is what I think these traditions are trying to point us to. Contentment is another word I can use for it. Peace is another way to describe what I experience. Bliss is another word that I might use. Joy. We could use happiness. Sometimes I reserve happiness for that sort of transient state. But again, this ends up being semantics, like what are we defining each term as? So we could use happiness, but a sort of calm, sustained happiness, rather than a happiness that seems to come and go very, very quickly. Now, as I already alluded to, there have been times when I have found that for whatever reason, I have dropped out of that state, if you will. And this will happen from time to time. It's just, I don't know, been part of my experience that while overall I will experience long, sustained periods of happiness and well-being, there will be periods or times when I sort of drop out. But like I said, those tend to be very rare, and they tend to be very, very short compared to these long, sustained periods of well-being. So this brings me back to a point that I've really tried to drill home over time on this channel, which is really happiness and well-being, peace, joy, bliss. They need to be experienced in the moment that you're in. And I know this may not make sense, and it might seem impossible depending on what's going on, your circumstances, what's going on in your life. But rest assured, I assure you that this is the case, that if you would start focusing on experiencing whatever you would call happiness, whatever you would call that feeling of happiness or bliss or peace or joy, if you would start focusing on experiencing it in the here and now, irrespective of outside circumstances, I think you will find that your life and the outside circumstances of your life will very much improve. I'm not going to say you're necessarily going to get everything that you ever wanted or that everything's always going to work out for you. Again, what we find in these wisdom traditions, they don't really teach that. They don't really say that you can always get what you want or that everything is always going to work out for you. What they do say is you can reduce or possibly eliminate suffering. And in my experience, that is finding peace with these ups and downs, being okay with the ups and downs. And one of the ways we do that, again, is by finding peace now, finding joy now. Now, I've experienced, I think, everything that a human being can experience in terms of different kinds of suffering and feeling detached. So I don't want to gaslight or make someone who isn't there feel like there's something wrong with them. I'll preface this by saying that you may have to do a lot of spiritual work, a lot of spiritual practices. You might need to meditate for months or years or decades to get to that point. You might have to work in person or one-on-one with knowledgeable teachers. You might have to do yoga and other types of practices. You might have to go to psychotherapy. There might be a lot of work that needs to be done. I am not going to say that it has to be done because I don't know your particular circumstances. I do know that from an ultimate perspective, where my experience lies, is none of that is absolutely essential. It's our true nature. What we're trying to experience is really our true nature, this sort of contentment, this bliss. The present moment is our true nature, you could say. It's right there, right here, right now. It doesn't really need anything from out there. We can connect with it in this moment, and we can experience the peace and the bliss and the joy. But like I said, I recognize that for some people, depending on where they are in their journey, this may seem impossible, even though ultimately it's possible. So again, a lot of this depends on our perspective. So again, if that's your perspective, oh, I can't just lay down and feel peaceful or blissful right now, I understand that. And I don't want to not acknowledge that. That may very well be your experience. Does that mean that that is ultimately true? I don't think so. But I recognize how that can be someone's experience. So it really is up to us, the amount of time, effort, energy that we're willing to devote to these sorts of things. And even if we're willing to put a lot of time and energy into these sorts of things, we might still find that it takes time. And I don't want to say that that might not be the case, because it might. So anyway, everyone, as always, these talks are meant to be helpful, so I hope it was. Again, if you'd like to help out, please like, subscribe, share, comment if you're on YouTube. And if you'd like to do more, you can check out the links below. I also have a shop that I've made in collaboration with a friend of mine, and we have all kinds of merch. We have shirts and hats and mugs and all kinds of things with fun phrases that I've come up with. So please check that out as well. Again, links below. All right, everyone, till next time, namaste and have a beautiful day.